She never meant to break the curse. She was just trying to return an overdue book when the Vampire King's fangs pierced her throat. And instead of dying like all the others, she woke up 3 days later in silk sheets, alive, breathing, and more terrifying to him than any army. The Royal Library of Nocturnum held secrets in languages even scholars had forgotten. Dust motes danced in the moonlight, filtering through stained glass windows, each one casting colored shadows across leather spines and ancient manuscripts. Isla moved through the aisles like a ghost, her footsteps silent on marble floors worn smooth by centuries of seekers. She loved the 3 a.m. shift, loved the way the library belonged entirely to her when the rest of the palace slept, loved that no one expected her to speak when surrounded by thousands of voices trapped in pages. The book she carried was older than most kingdoms, its leather binding cracked with age, gold leaf flaking from edges that had been turned by hands long since turned to dust. Lord Castellan's private collection, said the card tucked inside. Return before the lunar eclipse, or face the king's displeasure. Isla's hands trembled slightly as she climbed the spiral staircase to the restricted section. She'd worked in the palace library for 2 years and had never once ventured into Lord Castellan's chambers, but the book was 5 days overdue, and even her position as head librarian wouldn't protect her if she failed to return it. The upper corridor stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of vampire nobility whose painted eyes seemed to follow her progress. Candles flickered in wall sconces, their flames bending in drafts that whispered through gaps in ancient stone. She found the door marked with Castellan's crest and knocked softly. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. Isla bit her lip, anxiety rising in her chest like floodwater. The eclipse was tomorrow. She couldn't wait. Her fingers moved instinctively, signing to herself the way she always did when nervous. Just leave it at the door. He'll find it. Come back tomorrow. But tomorrow might be too late. She made a decision. There was another entrance to Castellan's study through the archive passage, a route she'd discovered while cataloging restricted texts. It was technically forbidden for servants to use, but returning the book mattered more than rules. The archive passage was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Cobwebs caught in her hair as she navigated by candlelight, the book pressed against her chest like a talisman. She emerged into what should have been Castellan's private study. Instead, she found herself in a chamber she'd never seen before. The room was circular, its walls lined entirely with mirrors, each one draped in black cloth. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the center, its curtains drawn, and standing beside it, shirt unlaced and eyes blazing crimson in the candlelight, stood King Draven Sanguinar himself. Time stopped. Isla's candle slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor and extinguishing instantly. She stood frozen in the doorway, the overdue book clutched to her chest. Unable to breathe, unable to move, unable to do anything but stare at the most dangerous man in the realm. Draven's expression shifted from surprise to something darker. Hunger. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. His voice was smoke and velvet, wrapping around her throat like a noose. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but no sound came. It never did. Her hands moved instinctively, signing an apology, but he wasn't looking at her hands. He was looking at her throat. The king moved with impossible speed. One moment he stood by the bed. The next he was in front of her, so close she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, could smell cedar and something older, something that made her hindbrain scream danger. "What are you?" he asked, tilting his head. His eyes weren't fully crimson anymore. They flickered between red and an unsettling mercury silver. Isla's mouth opened, closed. Her hands trembled as they formed the signs for mute and librarian and sorry, but Draven caught her wrists before she could finish. "Don't," he said, and there was something broken in that single word. "Don't make this harder. She didn't understand, didn't know what was happening until his other hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to expose the curve of her neck until she felt his breath against her skin. Cold as winter mornings. Until his fangs pierced her throat. The pain was instant and absolute. Like lightning in her veins, like burning from the inside out. She tried to scream, but silence was all she'd ever known. Her hands clawed at his shoulders, but he was stone, immovable, drinking deeply as her vision began to blur. Then something changed. The burning intensified, but instead of fading into death as she expected, it transformed. Heat replaced ice. Her blood sang instead of screamed, and Draven jerked back as if struck, his eyes wide with shock. No. He breathed. His hand went to his mouth, came away stained red. That's not possible. Isla collapsed. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Vampire King's face, twisted in an expression she couldn't name. Horror. Hope. Terror. All three at once. When she woke, she was drowning in silk. The sheets were cool against her fevered skin, softer than anything she'd ever touched in the servants' quarters. Candles burned in silver candelabras, casting dancing shadows across walls she didn't recognize. She sat up slowly, her head spinning. Her hand went instinctively to her throat. She expected to find wounds, torn flesh, the marks of a monster. Instead, her fingers traced two small punctures, already healing, surrounded by skin that felt strange. Warm. Almost electric. You're awake. Isla's head snapped toward the voice. Draven stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him like a general surveying a battlefield. He wore different clothes now, all black, formal, the attire of a king instead of whatever she'd interrupted before. How long? She wanted to ask. Her hands moved before she remembered he couldn't understand sign language, signing the question anyway because her body didn't know how else to speak. 3 days, Draven said without turning. His voice was quieter than she remembered. Rougher. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Her hands froze mid-sign. 3 days. She'd been bitten by the Vampire King, and somehow hadn't died. The overdue book lay on the table beside the bed, carefully placed. No longer her concern. Draven turned to face her finally, and Isla saw what she'd missed in the chaos of before. He looked exhausted. Not physically tired. Vampires didn't need sleep, but something deeper. Soul-weary. As if he'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Do you understand what you've done? He asked. Isla shook her head slowly. Her throat felt strange. Not painful, but different. Change. Every woman I've bitten for the last 300 years has died, Draven continued. His hands clenched at his sides. Every single one. Within minutes. Sometimes seconds. The venom in my bite is cursed. It doesn't turn humans into vampires like normal bites do. It kills them. He moved closer to the bed, his steps measured and careful, as if approaching a spooked animal. I don't feed on humans anymore because of it. Haven't for centuries. I use livestock, stored blood, anything to avoid. He stopped, his jaw working. To avoid watching another woman convulse and die in my arms. Isla's hand went to her throat again. The marks there tingled. She should be dead. By all accounts, by 3 centuries of precedent, she should be a corpse. But you're alive, Draven whispered. He was close enough now that she could see the violet shadows under his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. You're not just alive. He hesitated, searching for words. You're different. What do you mean? She wanted to ask, but her hands remained still. There was something in his expression that made her afraid to know the answer. The door burst open without warning. A tall vampire in silver robes strode in, spectacles perched on his nose, carrying a leather-bound journal. Your Majesty, I've cross-referenced the historical records and there's absolutely no precedent for. He stopped mid-sentence, seeing Isla awake. Oh. She's conscious. This is Dr. Theron, Draven said to Isla, though his eyes never left the doctor, my chief physician, and the only person who knows you're here. Theron approached the bed with clinical interest, pulling out various instruments. May I? He asked, gesturing to her arm. Isla nodded slowly. The doctor's touch was gentle as he examined the bite marks, took her pulse, listened to her heartbeat with a strange device that looked like it belonged in a different century. Remarkable, Theron muttered, scribbling notes. Heart rate elevated but stable. Temperature slightly higher than normal human range but not dangerous. The venom should have corrupted her entire system by now. Instead, it seems to have. Integrated. Integrated? Draven's voice was sharp. Theron removed his spectacles, cleaning them methodically. Your Majesty, I believe the young woman has somehow metabolized the curse. Instead of dying from it, her body has adapted. She's not turning into a vampire, mind you. She's still fundamentally human. But the venom has bonded with her physiology in a way I've never seen. Draven sat down heavily in a chair near the window, as if his legs had suddenly forgotten how to support him. 300 years. Theron nodded. 300 years of death. And now this. He turned to Isla with something like wonder in his ancient eyes. My dear, you may have just broken the oldest curse in vampire history. Isla's hands moved before she could stop them. Why me? What makes me different? Draven was watching her hands. She saw the moment he realized she was trying to communicate, saw confusion flicker across his face. What is she doing? Sign language, Theron said absently, still scribbling notes. She's asking why she's different. You understand her? The doctor glanced up, surprised by the sharpness in the king's tone. I spent 50 years studying human communication methods in the eastern provinces. Sign language, lip reading, written scripts, all of it. Quite useful for a physician, actually. Trauma often steals people's voices. Draven stood abruptly, crossed to Isla in 3 strides. His eyes locked on hers, intense and desperate. Ask her, he demanded, looking at Theron but speaking about Isla as if she weren't there. Ask her what makes her different. She can hear you perfectly well, Your Majesty, Theron said dryly. She's mute, not deaf. Draven's jaw clenched. Then she can hear me apologize. He turned to face Isla fully, and she saw something raw in his expression. For biting you. For almost killing you. For everything. His hands were shaking, she realized. The most powerful vampire in the realm, the king who'd conquered kingdoms and survived centuries, was standing in front of her with trembling hands. I don't know why you survived, he said quietly. But I intend to find out, not because I want to use you or study you like some experiment, but because 300 years ago I was cursed by someone I loved. And I've spent every day since then learning to hate myself for the monster it made me. If you're somehow immune, if your survival means the curse can be broken, he stopped, swallowed hard. It might mean I'm not beyond redemption. Isla's chest tightened. She hadn't expected vulnerability, hadn't expected the Vampire King to look at her like she was simultaneously his greatest hope and his deepest fear. Her hands moved slowly, carefully. Theron. She signed. Can you translate? Of course, the doctor said gently. Isla's fingers formed the shapes she needed. I don't know why I survived either. But I'm not afraid of you. Draven's expression cracked. Something that might have been pain or relief or both flickered across his face. You should be, he said roughly. I'm exactly the monster everyone says I am. Isla shook her head firmly. Her hands moved again, and this time she made sure he was watching. Monsters don't apologize, Theron translated, then added quietly. She has a point, Your Majesty. The silence that followed was thick and strange. Draven turned away, his shoulders rigid, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then he said, without looking at either of them, "Teach me." Theron blinked. "Your Majesty?" "The sign language," Draven said. His voice was rough. "If she's going to be here, if we're going to understand what happened, I need to be able to speak with her directly, not through a translator." The doctor's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "That's quite an undertaking, Your Majesty. The language is complex, nuanced. It could take months to achieve even basic proficiency." "Then we start now." Draven turned back to face them, and his expression had shifted into something Isla recognized. Determination. The same look he probably wore when making battle strategies or political decisions. "I have centuries. I can spare a few months." Isla's hands moved before Theron could respond. "Why? Why does it matter?" The doctor translated, and Draven's eyes found hers. "Because you deserve to be heard," he said simply, "and I'm tired of being surrounded by people who only know how to speak with their voices." Over the next 2 weeks, Isla remained in the king's private wing. Not as a prisoner, Theron insisted, but as a patient under observation. They needed to monitor her condition, ensure the venom had truly integrated safely, watch for any delayed effects. But Isla suspected the real reason was simpler. Draven didn't know what to do with her. She was an impossibility, a living contradiction to 3 centuries of curse, and he treated her like she might dissolve into myth if he looked away too long. The rooms they gave her were absurdly luxurious. Silk curtains, marble floors, a bathing chamber larger than the entire servants' quarters she'd shared with 6 other women. Books lined every wall, pulled from the library at her request. Philosophy, poetry, histories and languages she was slowly teaching herself to read. She spent her days among pages and her evenings with Draven. He came every night after sunset, when the palace settled into its nocturnal rhythms. Always announced, always formal, always carrying a notebook and an expression of fierce concentration. Theron had given him a manual on sign language, and the king approached learning it the way generals approached war. Methodically. Relentlessly. With absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Show me again," he said on the 5th night, his brow furrowed. "The sign for trust." Isla's hands moved slowly, one hand open, the other grasping it gently. Like this. Draven mimicked the gesture, his movements careful. His hands were larger than hers, scarred from battles she could only imagine, but he shaped the sign with surprising grace. "Trust," he repeated. "And this one?" He formed another sign, slightly clumsy. Isla corrected his finger position gently, and he tried again. "Better?" She nodded, offering a small smile. He caught the smile, and something in his expression softened. "You're a patient teacher," he said quietly. Then, hesitantly, he signed the words as he spoke them. "Thank you." It was broken, grammatically imperfect, but Isla's throat tightened anyway. He was trying. This ancient king who could command armies with a word was learning her language, her way of speaking, treating it like it mattered. They fell into a rhythm. Draven would practice vocabulary. Isla would correct and encourage. And slowly, conversation began to emerge. Not just rote memorization, but actual exchange. He told her about the curse, how it had started 300 years ago with a woman named Seraphine, a witch he'd loved and betrayed. How she died cursing him with her final breath, promising that his bite would never create companionship. Only death, that he'd spend eternity alone, unable to share his immortality with anyone he cared for. "Every woman since then who I've bitten has died," he signed haltingly on the 9th night. His grammar was improving. His fingers no longer stumbled over complex shapes. "I stopped trying after the 1st century. Stopped hoping. Learned to live with the isolation." "Why did you bite me?" Isla signed back. "If you knew it would kill me?" Draven's hands stilled. He looked down at them, at the scars and the strength and the centuries they carried. I wasn't thinking, he signed slowly. When you appeared in my chamber, I'd just woken from a blood dream, a nightmare where the hunger takes over and you're not yourself anymore. I saw you, smelled your heartbeat, and the curse, he stopped, started again. The curse makes the hunger worse, makes control harder. I thought I'd killed another innocent woman. Then you survived. His eyes met hers. And I didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. Both, Isla signed. I'd feel both. He almost smiled. You're wiser than you look, little librarian. She threw a cushion at him. He caught it with vampire reflexes, and this time he did smile, real and startled and unexpectedly young. On the 12th night, Draven arrived with someone new. A woman in scholar's robes, carrying scrolls and looking nervous. This is Magistra Veal, he said aloud, then signed it for Isla. She specializes in curse breaking. I've asked her to research your condition. The Magistra bowed deeply. Your Majesty. Miss. She turned to Isla with careful respect. I've been studying the historical records of Seraphine's curse. There's something unusual about the wording. What did you find? Draven signed the question before speaking it aloud, and Isla felt a strange warmth in her chest watching him translate naturally between both languages. Magistra Veal unfurled a scroll across the table, the original curse, written in Seraphine's own hand, recovered from the ruins of her tower. She pointed to flowing script that seemed to writhe on the parchment. It says, "Your bite shall bring death to any woman who gives you her voice." We always interpreted that as a general curse affecting all women, but what if it's more specific? Isla leaned forward, her eyes scanning the words even though she couldn't read the ancient dialect. Draven's hand moved to his jaw, a gesture she'd learned meant he was thinking deeply. More specific how? The Magistra looked at Isla meaningfully. What if it means any woman who gives you her voice? Literally, any woman who speaks to you, offers you her words, her voice. The room went very quiet. Theron, who'd been observing from his usual corner, sat forward suddenly. But Miss Illa can't give him her voice. She doesn't have one. Exactly, Magistra Veal said. She communicates, yes. She has language, thoughts, complex ideas. But she cannot literally give her voice because she has none to give. The curse may not recognize her as a valid target. Draven's hands had gone very still. Are you suggesting the curse has a loophole? That 300 years of death could have been avoided if I'd simply bitten someone who was mute? No, Your Majesty. The Magistra's expression was gentle. I'm suggesting that most magic is literal. Cruelly, painfully literal. Seraphine cursed you to never create a companion through your bite. She specified that your bite would kill any woman who gave you her voice, because voice represents connection, communication, the bridge between souls. She was ensuring you'd remain isolated. But Miss Isla, she doesn't fit the curse's parameters. She can't give you her voice because she speaks differently. The curse doesn't know what to do with her. Isla's hands trembled as she signed. So I survived because of a technicality? Because I'm mute? Draven translated for the others, his own hands shaking slightly. It's not just a technicality, Theron interjected quietly. It's proof that the curse can be circumvented, that you, he looked at Isla, exist outside its boundaries. The question is, what does that mean? They spent hours discussing possibilities, theories, magical precedents. But eventually the scholars left, and Draven remained behind, standing by the window overlooking the palace gardens. Isla approached slowly. She'd learned to read his moods over the past 2 weeks. This was his thinking posture, his trying not to hope posture. You're wondering if it changes anything, she signed. Draven glanced at her, then back at the window. Am I that transparent? She moved to stand beside him. The gardens below were beautiful in the moonlight, all silver roses and night-blooming jasmine. To someone who spent 2 weeks watching you learn to speak with your hands? Yes. He almost smiled, then, more seriously. He signed, "It changes everything, and nothing. You survived. That's..." He paused, searching for the sign. "That's miracle enough. I don't need more." But? There's always a but. His hands moved slowly, carefully shaping words that clearly mattered. "I've been alone for so long. And you're the first person in 3 centuries who isn't afraid of me, who sees me as something more than a monster or a crown. That's not because of the curse breaking. That's because of you." Isla's chest tightened. She'd seen glimpses of this over their evening lessons, the way he'd laugh at her jokes signed between vocabulary practice. The way he'd bring her new books without being asked, somehow knowing exactly which subjects fascinated her. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious he didn't know how to hold. "I'm afraid of you sometimes," she signed honestly. "When you talk about the blood dreams, the hunger, the battles you've fought, you should be powerful enough to crush me without thinking. But then you spend an hour practicing the sign for gentle until you get it perfect, and I remember you're not just a king or a vampire or a curse. You're a person who's trying." Draven's hand rose without thinking, stopping inches from her face. He seemed surprised by his own gesture, by the fact that he'd almost touched her. "May I?" He signed with his other hand. Isla nodded slowly, her heart suddenly racing. His fingers brushed her cheek, cool and careful. His thumb traced just below the bite marks on her throat, which had healed into 2 small silver scars that sometimes caught the light. "I think about killing you every day," he signed with one hand while the other remained against her face. "Not because I want to. Because I'm terrified I will. That one moment of lost control, one blood dream, and you'll be like all the others." His voice broke through, raw and spoken aloud. "I couldn't survive that. Not again. Not you." "Then teach me," Isla signed. "Teach me the signs for your hunger, your control, your warnings. Create a language between us so I know when you're struggling. You've learned my way of speaking. Let me learn yours." Something in his expression cracked open. She watched 3 centuries of isolation, of carefully maintained distance, of refusing to hope, all of it fracturing in his eyes. 3 weeks later, Isla stood in the palace library again, but everything was different. She wore clothes befitting a royal guest now, deep blue velvet that whispered against marble as she moved through familiar aisles. Other librarians nodded to her respectfully. Everyone knew she was under the king's personal protection, though rumors about why varied wildly. She was reshelving ancient texts when she felt the familiar coolness that meant Draven had entered the room. He moved with complete silence, a predator's grace, but she'd learned to sense his presence anyway. "Finding anything interesting?" He signed as he approached. Isla held up a tome bound in midnight blue leather. Medical texts from the Second Age. Theron requested them. Draven peered at the title, then signed, "Always studying." "That one never stops," she smiled, sliding the book into its proper place. Then she turned to find him watching her with an expression she'd seen increasingly often. Soft, almost wondering. "What?" she signed. "You've transformed this space," he signed. His hands moved with fluency now, barely any hesitation. "I used to avoid the library. Too many memories of Seraphine. We met here, actually, in the philosophy section. But now when I think of these shelves, these books, I think of you. That first night, terrified and clutching an overdue book like a shield. It's a better memory." Isla's hands stilled. She'd learned some of Seraphine's story over the past weeks. The brilliant witch who'd loved Draven genuinely before he'd betrayed that love for political alliance. The curse had been revenge, yes, but also heartbreak made manifest. "Do you still love her?" The question emerged before Isla could stop it. Draven went very still. Then slowly, carefully, he signed. I loved who she was before I broke her, before I chose power over her, chose to marry someone politically advantageous instead of the woman who actually understood me. I destroyed something beautiful because I thought I had time, thought immortality meant I could have everything eventually. He looked away. The curse taught me otherwise. I don't love her anymore. I mourn her. There's a difference. What's the difference? Draven's eyes found hers again. Love wants the person to exist, to thrive, even without you. Mourning is just missing what you had and knowing you can never fix it. His hands moved through the signs with grace that still surprised her. I mourned Seraphine for 300 years. But I don't anymore. Why not? Because I met a librarian who throws cushions at kings and makes me practice sign language until my hands cramp, and she taught me that redemption isn't about fixing the past, it's about being better in the present. Isla's breath caught. The way he looked at her, standing among books and moonlight and centuries of collected knowledge, made her feel like the most important text in the entire library. Someone cleared their throat. They both turned to find Theron standing at the end of the aisle, looking amused. Your Majesty, I hate to interrupt what is clearly a moment, but we have a situation. What kind of situation? Draven's posture shifted immediately into king mode, the kind where the Council of Lords is demanding an audience and they've brought a delegation from the House of Thorns. Draven's jaw clenched. Isla had learned about the House of Thorns during her reading, a powerful vampire family that had been pressuring Draven to marry one of their daughters for the past century. Political alliance, pure bloodlines, all the things ancient nobility cared about. They know about me? She signed to Theron. The doctor nodded grimly. News travels, especially news about the king keeping a human woman in his private quarters. They're concerned. Draven's hand found Isla's shoulder. Stay here. I'll handle this. No, she signed firmly. If they're questioning your judgment because of me, I should be there. Absolutely not. Draven signed back sharply. The council isn't kind to humans. They'll tear you apart with words alone. Then they'll learn I don't tear easily. Isla signed. Her hands moved with conviction. I survived your bite, remember? I think I can handle some political vampires. Draven looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He turned to Theron. Make sure she has proper court attire. If she's attending council, she'll be introduced as my personal guest. The doctor's eyebrows rose. Your Majesty, that designation carries implications. Good, Draven signed, his eyes never leaving Isla's. Let them imply. The council chamber was exactly as intimidating as Isla had imagined. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Ancient banners hung from stone walls, each one representing a vampire house older than human civilizations. The council sat in a semicircle of throne-like chairs, 12 lords and ladies whose combined age probably exceeded 10,000 years. And standing before them in a cluster of perfect beauty and barely concealed disdain stood the House of Thorns delegation. Lady Morgantha Thorns was the most beautiful creature Isla had ever seen. Tall, pale as moonlight, with hair like spilled ink and eyes the color of fresh blood. She wore a gown of black lace that probably cost more than Isla's entire village had earned in a decade. Beside her stood her two sisters, equally stunning, equally aware of their power. Draven sat on his throne, crown heavy on his brow, every inch the immortal king. Isla stood 3 steps behind him, positioned as a guest but close enough to see his hands if he needed to sign. Your Majesty, Lord Castellan began, we've called this session to address concerning rumors. You've been keeping a human woman in your private quarters. The way he said human made it sound like disease. Draven's expression didn't change. I have. She's under my protection. Lady Morgantha stepped forward, her movement liquid grace. With respect, Your Majesty, the optics are troubling. A king seen to favor a human servant suggests weakness. It suggests you've forgotten what you are. Isla's hands clenched at her sides. Draven's fingers twitched. a tiny sign he'd taught her. Steady. He was asking her to stay calm. I know exactly what I am, Draven said quietly, his voice carrying through the chamber. I am a king who values competence over species, intelligence over lineage. And what competence does this human possess? Another council member asked, his tone dripping condescension. Beyond warming your bed, of course. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Isla felt Draven's rage like a physical presence, cold and vast and terrifying. His hand moved to the armrest of his throne, gripping hard enough that she heard stone crack. Careful, Lord Varen, Draven said, each word sharp as broken glass. You're questioning my judgment and insulting my guest in the same breath. That's unwise. But Lady Morgantha smiled, sensing blood in the water. Come now, Your Majesty. We've been patient with your eccentricities for centuries. But this is different. You need an appropriate match, someone of proper lineage who can stand beside you as queen, not a human pet who can't even speak. Isla's hands moved before she could think. I can speak, just not with my voice. Everyone turned to stare at her. Lord Varen sneered. And what did the creature just say? Draven stood slowly, fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. She said she can speak. And she's correct. He moved down from his throne to stand beside Isla, his hand finding hers in full view of the entire council. This woman, he continued, his voice deadly quiet, is the first person in 300 years to survive my curse. The council went silent. Even Lady Morgantha's perfect composure cracked slightly. Impossible, Lord Castellan breathed. Draven's hand tightened on Isla's. 3 weeks ago, I bit her. Not intentionally, he added, glancing at Isla with something apologetic in his eyes. An accident. A moment of lost control. By all accounts, by 3 centuries of precedent, she should have died within minutes. Instead, she survived. Thrived. The curse didn't touch her. How? Lady Morgantha's voice had lost its honeyed quality. Because, Draven signed as he spoke, requiring Isla to translate in her mind, she doesn't fit the curse's parameters. Seraphine cursed me to kill any woman who gave me her voice. But Isla has no voice to give. She speaks differently. The curse is literal, cruelly literal. And it failed. Magistra Vale stepped forward from the shadows, carrying her scrolls. I've verified it, my lords, my ladies. The curse specifically targets voiced communication. Miss Isla exists outside its scope. She's not an anomaly. She's a solution. The council erupted in whispers. Isla stood very still, feeling hundreds of years of vampire politics swirling around her like a storm. Draven's hand remained wrapped around hers, anchoring her. This changes nothing, Lord Varen insisted. She's still human. Still temporary. Still inappropriate for a king. This changes everything, Draven countered. For 300 years I've been unable to create a companion. Unable to share my immortality with anyone because the curse kills them. The council has pressured me to marry for political alliance, knowing full well any wife would grow old and die while I remained unchanged. Knowing I could never turn her into a vampire to extend her life because my bite brings death, not transformation. He looked at Isla, and something in his expression made her breath catch. But Isla survived. Which means the curse can be circumvented. Which means, for the first time in 3 centuries, I could potentially have what every other vampire takes for granted. A true companion. Are you suggesting you intend to marry the human? Lady Morgantha's voice was ice. Draven's hand moved through a sign that only Isla could see. Trust me. I'm suggesting, he said aloud, that my personal relationships are no longer the council's concern. I've served this realm faithfully for 800 years. I've expanded borders, stabilized the economy, maintained peace with human territories. I've earned the right to choose my own companion without political interference. The council cannot object, Lord Castellan said slowly. But they can. Question what? Whether you're thinking clearly, or whether this human has somehow compromised your judgment. Test me then, Draven said flatly. Ask your questions. Prove to yourselves I'm not compromised. Ask her questions, Lady Morgantha interjected, her eyes fixed on Isla with predatory focus. If she's so remarkable, let her demonstrate. Without you to protect her. Isla felt Draven tense beside her. His hand moved in the sign they'd developed. Danger. You don't have to do this, he signed subtly. Yes, I do. She signed back. Or they'll never stop questioning. Draven's jaw clenched, but he stepped back, giving her space. Lady Morgantha circled Isla slowly, like a cat circling prey. Tell me, little human, do you understand what you've done, coming into the king's life, disrupting centuries of established protocol? Isla's hands moved clearly, and Magistra Vale translated. I returned an overdue library book. That's what started this. Several council members actually laughed before catching themselves. Lady Morgantha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Charming. And now you believe you belong here? Among us? Do you belong anywhere? Isla signed back genuine curiosity in the question. Or do all of you simply occupy the same space while pretending connection? Magistra Vale translated, then added quietly, she's got a point. Lady Morgantha's expression hardened. You're bold for someone who could be killed with a thought. Isla met her gaze steadily. Her hands formed words she'd practiced with Draven during their late-night conversations. Everyone dies. Some of us just take longer. The difference is whether we spend that time afraid or living. The chamber went very quiet. Lord Varen leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowing. Philosophy from a librarian. How novel. Tell me, girl, what do you know of our world? Of vampire politics and the weight of immortality? Isla's hands moved steadily. I know that immortality doesn't prevent loneliness. That power doesn't equal wisdom. That your king has spent 300 years isolated because of a curse born from his own mistakes, and instead of helping him, you've used his pain as leverage for political gain. Magistra Vale's voice wavered slightly as she translated, clearly impressed. The council members shifted uncomfortably. You accuse us of manipulation? Lord Castellan's voice was dangerous. Isla shook her head. Her hands formed gentle shapes. I observe that systems often prioritize their own continuation over the people they claim to serve. You've kept King Draven trapped in political expectations rather than helping him find genuine connection. Because his isolation served your purposes. A king without companion bonds is easier to control. Another long silence. Then Lady Morgantha laughed, sharp and bitter. She's smarter than she looks, I'll grant her that. But intelligence doesn't make her suitable. She's human, temporary. Even if the curse doesn't kill her, time will. In 50 years she'll be old and dying while you, she turned to Draven, remain unchanged. Have you considered that? Yes, Draven said quietly. Every day since she survived. Isla turned to look at him, surprised. They hadn't discussed this. And? Lady Morgantha pressed. What solution does love offer to mortality? I don't know, Draven admitted. His hand found Isla's again, but I'd rather have 50 years of genuine connection than another 3 centuries of political isolation. I've been alone long enough. The rawness in his voice made even the ancient council members pause. You would choose temporary happiness over eternal alliance? Lord Varen asked. Draven's eyes never left Isla's. I would choose to actually be happy, yes. Novel concept, I know. Isla's throat tightened. She signed something quickly. Privately, her hands positioned so only Draven could see. What did she say? Lady Morgantha demanded. Tell me. Draven said calmly. Why should I? You've made it abundantly clear she's beneath your notice. Why do her words suddenly matter? Because they matter to you, the vampire woman replied. And that makes them dangerous. Draven's smile was cold. She said, don't choose me just to defy them. Choose yourself first. He looked at the council. She's right. This isn't about rebellion or proving points for the first time in 300 years. I'm not afraid of my own bite. I'm not afraid to get close to someone. And you want to take that away because it doesn't fit your political agenda. The Council of Lords shall vote, Lord Castellan announced abruptly. All in favor of the king maintaining his current situation. With the human guest? Silence. Then slowly, one hand rose. Magistra Vale, standing among the scholars, raised hers. I vote in favor. She's fascinating, and more importantly, she makes His Majesty less homicidal. That's worth supporting. Another hand rose. Lord Theron, the doctor, from his position in the medical delegation. I vote in favor. My research requires observing their unique situation. 2 more hands rose. Then 3. One by one, council members who'd seen 800 years of Draven's rule, who'd watched him grow colder and more isolated after the curse, voted to let him keep the one person who'd made him smile in centuries. The vote passed. Barely, but it passed. Lady Morgantha's face was a mask of controlled fury. This isn't over, she said quietly. There are other concerns, other questions that must be answered, such as? Draven's voice carried warning. Such as what happens when the human dies? When you're alone again, and the curse remains? What happens to our kingdom then? I'll face that when it comes, Draven said, 50 years from now, or 100 if we're lucky. But I won't sacrifice my present happiness for hypothetical future pain. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. He turned his back on the council, on Lady Morgantha's perfect face and Lord Varen's calculating expression, and offered his hand to Isla. Shall we? She took it, her fingers threading through his, and together they walked out of the council chamber. Behind them, politicians whispered and plotted and calculated. But for the first time in 3 centuries, Draven didn't care. That night, they stood on Draven's private balcony overlooking the city. The moon hung heavy and silver, painting everything in shades of mercury and dreams. I need to tell you something, Draven signed. His hands moved slowly, carefully. Isla turned to face him fully. He'd removed his crown, his formal robes, and stood in simple black clothing that made him look less like a king and more like the man she'd come to know during late-night sign language lessons. When you survived my bite, he signed. I felt something I hadn't felt in 300 years. Hope. But hope is terrifying when you've learned not to trust it. His hands paused, then continued. I've been alone so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to want someone to stay. Not just physically present, but, he searched for the sign, truly stay. To choose to be here. I choose to be here. Isla signed back. Not because of the curse or the politics or any of it. Because you learned my language. Because you look at me like I matter. Because you're trying to be better than what the curse made you. Draven's hand rose to her face, cupping her cheek the way he had that first time. But there's something else, he signed with his free hand. The curse may not kill you through my bite. But there are other dangers. Blood dreams still happen. The hunger still comes. And if I ever lose control again, if I drink too much, you could still die. I know, Isla signed. You've told me. You've warned me 12 times. So why stay? His eyes searched hers, desperate and confused and hopeful all at once. Why risk it? Because risk is part of caring about someone, she signed. You risk hurting me. I risk being hurt. That's what connection means. The alternative is isolation, and I've spent my whole life isolated because people assumed I had nothing to say. Her hands moved faster, more passionate. You're the first person who learned my language instead of expecting me to learn yours, who treated my silence as something valuable instead of something broken. I'm not staying despite the danger. I'm staying because you're worth the risk. Draven pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. His hands moved in the sign he'd practiced hundreds of times alone before ever showing her. I love you. Isla's breath caught. She signed it back, her hands trembling slightly. "I love you too." They stood like that for a long time, breathing together. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the most profound connections happen not despite differences, but because of them. Then Draven pulled back slightly, something mischievous in his expression. He signed, "I have something to show you." "What?" "A solution." "Maybe. He's been keeping secrets." He led her through the palace, down corridors she'd never seen, into depths that smelled of old magic and older stone. They emerged in a circular chamber lined with mirrors, each one covered in black cloth. "This is where you found me, that first night," Draven signed. "Where I sleep during blood dreams. Where the curse feels strongest." He moved to the largest mirror and pulled away its covering. The glass beneath was ancient, silvered with age, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the candlelight. This mirror, he signed, was Seraphine's. She used it for scrying, for seeing possibilities. After she died, I kept it covered because looking at it hurt. But Magistra Vale found something. He gestured, and the scholar emerged from shadows Isla hadn't noticed. "I've been researching curse breaking for 3 decades, Magistra Vale said, her voice echoing strangely. "And I believe Seraphine left a key hidden in this mirror. A way to undo the curse entirely." Isla's hands flew. Why didn't she use it? "Because it requires something she didn't have," the Magistra said quietly. "Forgiveness. The curse can be broken if Draven is forgiven by someone he's harmed, someone who has every right to hate him but chooses compassion instead. And that person must have survived his bite." She looked at Isla meaningfully. "You're the only person in 300 years who qualifies." Isla's mind raced. "You want me to forgive him?" "For biting you, yes," Magistra Vale said. "It wasn't intentional, I know, but the curse doesn't care about intent. It cares about harm caused and forgiveness given. If you can truly forgive him, completely and without reservation, the curse should break." Draven's hands moved sharply. "No, absolutely not." Both women turned to him. "You can't ask this of her," he signed, his movements angry and afraid. "She shouldn't have to forgive me. I almost killed her. The fact that it was an accident doesn't erase the harm." "I already forgive you," Isla signed. "I have since the beginning." Draven shook his head violently. "You don't understand. The spell requires," he paused, struggling with the signs. "It requires you to speak the forgiveness aloud. Into the mirror with your voice." The chamber went silent. Isla's hands fell to her sides. She stared at the mirror, at the writhing symbols, at the impossible task before her. "I can't," she signed. "I don't have a voice." "I know," Draven signed back, something broken in his expression. "That's why we can't do this. The curse is too clever. It survived my bite because you're mute, but to break it entirely you'd need to speak. It's designed to be unbreakable." Isla stepped toward the mirror. Her reflection stared back, distorted by ancient silver, and for a long moment she just looked at herself. A mute librarian who'd accidentally broken part of a 300-year-old curse. A woman who'd somehow made a vampire king learn sign language. Someone who'd survived the impossible. Her hand rose to her throat, touching the 2 silver scars there. She turned to Magistra Vale. "What exactly would I need to say?" The scholar consulted her notes. "The words are specific. I forgive you for the harm done. I release you from the weight of your actions. I choose compassion over vengeance, and in doing so, I break this curse." 12 words, spoken into the mirror at midnight during a new moon. Isla's hands moved slowly. "I've never spoken in my life. I don't know if I physically can." Theron stepped forward from where he'd been observing. "I've examined you thoroughly," Theron said gently. "There's no physical damage to your vocal cords. Your muteness is neurological. The pathways that connect thought to speech simply never developed. But," he hesitated, "with the venom now integrated into your system, with the way it's changed your physiology, there's a small possibility those pathways could be Encouraged. Encouraged how? Draven signed sharply. I'm not experimenting on her. Not with this, Theron said. With your venom. It's already in her blood. Already bonded to her somehow. If we could understand that bond better, we might be able to use it as a bridge. To connect the parts of her mind that form words to the physical ability to produce them. Isla's hands stilled. You're saying the curse might have given me the ability to break it? Ironic, isn't it? Magistra Vale's smile was sad. Seraphine was brilliant. She built in hope just to make the impossibility more cruel. You can survive the bite because you're mute, but to fully break free, you'd need to speak. It's a perfect trap. Unless, Isla signed slowly, it's not a trap. What if it's a test? Everyone turned to look at her. She continued signing, her thoughts racing. What if Seraphine built in a way to break the curse because she hoped Draven would grow? Would change? Would find someone who could help him become better than the person who betrayed her? Draven's hands moved weakly. Seraphine wanted me to suffer. She died hating me. Did she? Isla challenged. Or did she die loving you and hating what you'd done? There's a difference. She turned to the mirror, to her own reflection. If she wanted pure vengeance, the curse would have no escape. But it does. It has this exact, specific, impossible solution. Almost like she was saying, if you can find someone who survives your bite and chooses to forgive you, someone who has every reason to hate you but doesn't, then maybe you've learned enough to deserve freedom. The chamber was silent except for their breathing. You're giving her too much credit, Draven signed. His hands trembled. She was dying. She was in pain. She wasn't thinking about my redemption. Maybe not consciously, Isla signed back. But love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you. It gets twisted, becomes anger or grief or, she paused, or curses that contain escape clauses. She looked at him directly. Do you want to break the curse? More than anything, Draven signed immediately. Then help me try. His face went through a dozen emotions before settling on fierce determination. He turned to Theron. What do you need? The next 3 weeks were agony and wonder mixed together. Theron created a process he called neural pathway reconstruction, which sounded scientific but felt like magic. Every evening, Isla would sit in the medical chamber while Draven gave her tiny amounts of his venom, drops placed under her tongue that Theron believed would strengthen the bond between the curse's magic and her neurological system. And every evening, she would try to speak. At first, nothing happened. She'd form words in her mind, feel them clear and perfect, but they'd die somewhere between thought and breath. Her throat would work. Her mouth would open. But silence remained. It's not working, she signed on the 5th night, frustrated tears on her cheeks. Draven's hands found hers. We can stop. We don't have to do this. Yes, we do, she signed back. Because even if I can't speak, trying matters. Trying means we believe change is possible. By the 10th night, something shifted. Isla felt it like a door opening in her mind, a pathway she'd never had access to suddenly illuminated. She tried to say Draven's name. Her throat moved. Her lips formed the shape. And the faintest whisper emerged. Just breath and intention. Not quite sound, but something. Draven's eyes went wide. Again. He signed urgently. Try again. She did, and this time the whisper had shape. Draw. Not his full name. Not a complete sound. But the beginning of one. Theron was scribbling notes frantically. The venom is acting as a bridge. It's connecting her thoughts to her vocal mechanism. With practice, with time, she might actually be able to. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. By the 15th night, Isla could whisper full words. Soft, breathy, barely audible, but words nonetheless. Book, she whispered, holding one up. Moon, pointing at the window. Draven, looking at him. Each word cost energy, made her throat ache, but they came. On the 18th night, she spoke her first full sentence. I can hear my own voice. It was rough, unpracticed, strange to her own ears. But it was hers. Draven pulled her into his arms, his shoulders shaking. She realized he was crying. 300-year-old vampire king, crying because the woman he loved had found her voice. The new moon came on the 21st night. They gathered in the mirror chamber at midnight. Draven, Isla, Theron, Magistra Vale, and, surprisingly, several council members who'd voted in her favor. They wanted to witness history. Are you certain? Draven signed to Isla one final time. She took his hand and spoke aloud, her voice still soft but growing stronger. I'm certain. Magistra Vale uncovered the mirror. The symbols on its surface glowed faintly in the candlelight, pulsing like a heartbeat. Stand before it, the scholar instructed quietly. Speak the words clearly. And mean them. That last part is crucial. The magic will know if you're lying. Isla stepped up to the mirror. Her reflection looked back, different from the terrified girl who'd stumbled into a vampire king's chamber 4 months ago. She'd gained weight, filled out from constant palace meals. Her hair was longer, styled. But more than that, her eyes looked different. Confident, like someone who'd learned she mattered. She glanced back at Draven. He stood rigid, terrified, hopeful. His hand signed quickly. You don't have to do this. I'll be fine with the partial curse break. I won't. Isla's voice was stronger now. I won't watch you suffer for 3 more centuries because I was too afraid to try. His expression cracked. I love you. I love you too. She turned back to the mirror, took a breath, and spoke. I forgive you for the harm done. The words came out clear, each one deliberate. The mirror's surface rippled like water. I release you from the weight of your actions. The symbols began to glow brighter, burning with cold blue light. I choose compassion over vengeance. The temperature in the room dropped. Frost crawled across the mirror's surface, spreading in intricate patterns. And in doing so, Isla's voice caught. She felt something building in the mirror, something vast and old and powerful. Felt Seraphine's magic recognizing the words, testing them for truth. She thought about Draven learning sign language with desperate focus, about him bringing her books without being asked, about the way he looked at her like she'd given him back pieces of himself he'd thought lost forever, and in doing so, I break this curse. The mirror exploded with light, not shattering, but pure luminescence that filled the entire chamber, blinding and cold and ancient. Isla felt it wash over her like a wave, through her, searching her words for deception and finding none. The light found Draven next. He gasped, falling to his knees as 300 years of curse magic ripped away from him. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. The light faded. The mirror's surface returned to normal, but the symbols had vanished. Just plain ancient glass now, reflecting the shocked faces of everyone in the chamber. Isla ran to Draven's side. He was breathing hard, his eyes wide and disoriented. His hand found hers, gripped it like a lifeline. Is it? He started, then stopped. Tried again. Is it gone? Theron rushed forward with his medical instruments. After several minutes of examination, he sat back, wonder on his face. Your blood composition has changed. Your Majesty, the curse marker we've been tracking for 3 centuries, it's gone. Completely. Draven looked at his hands like he'd never seen them before. 300 years. His voice was rough. 300 years of death in my bite, and you just spoke it away. Isla's fingers brushed his cheek. Not just me. You. You changed. You learned. You became someone who deserved forgiveness. That's what broke it. The council members were murmuring, amazed. Lady Morgantha, who'd attended despite her opposition, stood frozen with shock. Magistra Vale was weeping openly, 3 decades of research validated in a single moment. But Isla only had eyes for Draven. He pulled her close, his forehead against hers. What now? He whispered. Now, Isla said, her voice growing more confident with each word. we find out what living without a curse feels like. 6 months later, the Royal Library held its first annual Sign Language Festival. The entire palace had learned basic signs by royal decree. Servants signed to nobles. Guards signed to visiting dignitaries. Children ran through corridors, hands flying in conversations that needed no sound. Isla stood in the main hall, now officially titled Royal Librarian and Cultural Ambassador, watching people communicate in the language that had saved a kingdom. Draven approached from behind, his arms wrapping around her waist. His hands signed against her stomach where only she could see. "Happy?" "Very," she said aloud, then signed it back to him. Because some things deserved 2 languages. He turned her to face him. "I have something to ask you." His hands moved formally, the way he'd sign in council, "and I want to ask it properly, in your language and mine." He dropped to one knee. The entire library went silent. People turned to watch their king kneel before a human woman, hands moving in signs they'd all learned to recognize. Isla Thorne. Draven signed and spoke simultaneously. "You survived my curse. You gave me back my voice by teaching me yours. You forgave the unforgivable and broke magic that 300 years couldn't crack. Will you?" He paused, pulling out a ring that glowed with soft silver light. "Marry me?" Not because of politics or pressure or anything except this. He signed the final words alone. No voice. "I love you. Choose me back." Isla's hands were shaking as she signed her answer, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Always yes. The wedding happened in the Royal Library among books and moonlight, witnessed by thousands. Human and vampire alike came to see the mute librarian who'd broken a curse marry the vampire king who'd learned her language. Isla wore white silk that whispered against marble floors. Draven wore his crown, and the expression of someone who still couldn't quite believe his fortune. The ceremony was conducted in 2 languages. The officiant spoke each line aloud, then Draven and Isla signed their responses to each other, hands moving in the vocabulary they'd built together. Word by word, sign by sign, they promised forever. When it came time for vows, Isla chose to speak. Her voice was stronger now, months of practice making it clear and certain. "I promise to keep learning your languages," she said, looking into Draven's eyes. "The ones you speak with your voice, and the ones you speak with silence. The language of your hunger, your control, your fears. I promise to see you, always, not as a monster or a king or a curse, but as the person who practices sign language until his hands cramp, because making me feel heard matters more than anything else." Draven's vows were signed. His hands moved with the fluency of someone who'd spent months perfecting every gesture. "I promise to hear you, always. To value your silence as much as your voice. To remember that strength comes in many forms, and that you taught me the most important one, the strength to be vulnerable. I promise to spend eternity learning new ways to tell you that you saved me. Not by breaking the curse, but by seeing me when everyone else only saw what I'd done wrong." They kissed as husband and wife, while thousands of guests signed their approval, hands moving in waves of celebration that needed no sound. The feast afterward lasted until dawn. Vampires who'd never considered humans as equals found themselves laughing with servants. Nobles who'd looked down on sign language for centuries were attempting conversations. Clumsy but genuine, and in the center of it all, Isla and Draven danced, his hand signing poetry against her back while she whispered responses that made him smile. Lady Morgantha approached as the night wound down. Her expression was carefully neutral. "You won," she said simply. Isla shook her head. "This wasn't a competition, wasn't it?" The vampire woman's lips quirked. "But I suppose you're right. You didn't win. You just changed everything." She glanced at Draven, who was being congratulated by Lord Castellan. "He's different now, softer, happier." "It's disconcerting. He was always capable of happiness," Isla said quietly. "He just needed permission to try." Lady Morgantha studied her for a long moment. I hated you at first. Truly. But watching him learn your language, watching him become human in the best sense of that word, I realized something. She paused. Love that requires someone to change who they are isn't love. But love that encourages someone to become who they were meant to be? That's real. She inclined her head respectfully and walked away, leaving Isla staring after her in surprise. Years passed. 5, then 10, then 20. Isla aged as humans do, silver threading through her hair, smile lines deepening around her eyes. Draven remained unchanged, immortal and beautiful as the night they'd met, but the fear that had haunted their early days, the terror of her mortality versus his immortality, never materialized the way they'd expected. Instead, they found richness in the difference. Isla taught Draven to value the present because she wouldn't be there forever. Draven taught Isla to think in longer timelines, to build things that would outlast her physical presence. Together they created a legacy. Sign language became standard education throughout the vampire realm. Libraries were built in every province, each one staffed by people who understood that communication came in many forms. The curse-breaking became legend, taught to children as proof that change was possible, that even centuries-old magic could be undone through compassion. On their 30th anniversary, they stood on the same balcony where Draven had first told Isla he loved her. She was 52 now, gray-haired and gracefully aging. He looked exactly as he had at their wedding. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice still strong despite the years. "Choosing someone temporary?" Draven's hands moved through signs that had become second nature. "Every moment with you has been worth the knowledge that it will end. I'd rather have 50 years of this than 500 years of empty immortality." 40 years left, Isla said quietly, doing the math humans always did. "Maybe 50 if I'm lucky, then we make them count." His arms wrapped around her. "Besides, you've left pieces of yourself everywhere. In every library. Every person who learned sign language because of you. Every child who grew up knowing their disability wasn't a limitation. You'll never really be gone." Isla leaned back against him, watching the city lights below. "Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone. When you're alone again. Promise you won't close yourself off. That you'll remember how to let people in." Draven's hand stilled against her. Then slowly, carefully, he signed, "I promise, but you've made that easier. You taught me that being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing. I'll have memories, friendships, purpose. And I'll carry you with me. In every sign, every book, every moment of kindness I show because you taught me how." They stood together in comfortable silence as the moon rose higher. Below them, the palace library glowed with light, filled with people reading, learning, communicating in dozens of different ways. And somewhere in those shelves sat a record of their story. A testament to the mute librarian who survived a lethal bite and the vampire king who learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a better future. One word at a time. One sign at a time. One moment of choosing love over fear. Compassion over vengeance. Connection over isolation. The curse was broken. But what they'd built in its place, that was the real magic.